My name is Michael, and this is where it begins, or perhaps where everything I knew ends. This morning, like every morning, I woke up to the gentle sound of my wife Julia's voice as she hummed in the bathroom. The sound used to fill me with a sense of peace, a reassurance of the steady love and routine in our life together. But today it sounded different, as if the notes carried a weight, a secret. Julia and I met in our late 20s, both freshly out of grad school, ambitious, driven, and eager to carve out a meaningful existence. We married within a year of meeting, drawn together by our shared values and dreams. Our life, as I saw it, was good, filled with mutual respect, and the kind of partnership I always hoped for. I'm a software developer, often lost in lines of code, solving problems that seem important in the moment but trivial when I step back. Julia is a marketing consultant, her world a whirl of creativity and constant networking. Our careers, demanding as they are, were bridges to our aspirations, not barriers to our relationship. Or so I thought. This doubt, this whisper of unease, started subtly. A late meeting here, an unexpected business trip there. Things that are perfectly normal in our lines of work. But something in the way Julia began to guard her phone, or how her explanation seemed a bit too rehearsed, sparked a chill of suspicion that I couldn't shake off. Then came last night. Julia was at another late business dinner, one of many this month. She texted to say it would go later than expected, her words punctuated by a smiley face, an attempt to ease the tension that had started to build between us. I tried to distract myself with work, the glow of my computer screen a poor substitute for her presence. It was nearly midnight when she came home, her face flushed from the cold, her eyes avoiding mine. She talked about her dinner, her words spilling out quickly, too quickly. There was a jitteriness about her, an edge to her voice that I hadn't heard before. When she kissed me goodnight, her lips were tense, her touch fleeting. As I lay in bed next to her, watching the rise and fall of her chest, I realized how much I dreaded the possibility of discovering something that could shatter my world. But I also knew that I couldn't ignore these whispers of doubt any longer. I needed to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Tomorrow, I decided I would start looking for answers. Tomorrow, I would begin to follow the threads of suspicion, hoping both to vindicate my wife and to brace myself against the potential unraveling of the life we had built together. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting lines across the bedroom floor, slicing the room into segments of light and shadow. Julia was already up, the sound of clattering dishes drifting from the kitchen. My resolve from last night lingered, a firm undercurrent beneath the routine sounds of our shared life. I got out of bed and prepared for the day with mechanical precision, my mind turning over the possibilities. Could I really suspect Julia of infidelity? Was I just being paranoid, seeing shadows where there were none? Yet, the nagging feeling wouldn't leave me. The late returns home, the secretive phone calls, her sudden protectiveness over her digital life. At breakfast, Julia was upbeat, talking about an upcoming project with more enthusiasm than usual. She looked beautiful, the morning lights softening her features, highlighting the flecks of green in her hazel eyes. Watching her, a part of me wanted to dismiss all my fears, to chalk it up to stress and too many late nights coding. But the seed of doubt was sown, and it was sprouting, relentless in its growth. I might be late again tonight, she said as she poured more coffee into my cup, her hands steady, her voice casual. We've got a new client from overseas, and the team is meeting for dinner to discuss the campaign. I'll try not to make it too late. Sounds important, I managed to say, my voice neutral. Which client is it? Oh, just some big tech firm from Japan. You wouldn't know them, she replied quickly, a little too quickly. I nodded, pretending to be absorbed in my toast, while my mind raced. It was unlike Julia not to share details. She used to joke that her life was an open book compared to my code encrypted one. As soon as she left for work, the quiet of the house wrapped around me like a thick blanket, suffocating in its vastness. I knew I couldn't just sit and let the day slip by, governed by my fears and imaginations. I had to know. Pulling out my laptop, I started with what I knew best, digital traces. Julia and I shared a cloud account for storing photos and documents, something we set up years ago for convenience. I logged in, telling myself that I was just being cautious, that a loving husband would trust his wife. But wasn't I also a loving husband for wanting to protect what we had from potential threats, even if those threats might come from within? The cloud was mostly filled with pictures of vacations, family gatherings, and our dog Max. I sifted through them, looking for anything recent that seemed out of place. It was then I noticed a folder that had been recently updated, something I hadn't seen before, labeled Work Events Private. The word echoed in my head. Why would Julia have a private folder in our shared cloud? My heart pounded as I clicked on it, half hoping it would be nothing, just work photos she hadn't had time to sort through. The first few pictures were innocent enough. Office parties, team lunches. But then I scrolled down to the newer images and my breath caught. There she was, Julia, looking radiant, more so than I had seen recently. But she wasn't alone. In each photo, she was with the same man, a tall, distinguished-looking individual I had never seen before. They were laughing, his hand lightly touching her back, their closeness unmistakable. I closed the laptop, my mind reeling. These photos were not proof of an affair, but they were a lead, a thread I couldn't ignore. I needed more before I could confront her, more concrete evidence to either calm or confirm my fears. Tonight, I decided I would follow her to this dinner. If she was meeting her team, I'd see it for myself. If not, well, I would cross that bridge when I came to it. For now, the thread of doubt continued to unravel, and I was too far gone to simply look away. The day dragged on, each hour punctuated by the tick of the clock and the throb of my doubts. My work suffered. Lines of code blurred into a meaningless jumble as my mind replayed the images of Julia and the unknown man, their intimacy a stark contrast to the growing distance between us. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with strokes of orange and purple, I prepared for the evening. I told myself this was necessary, that any loving husband would want to protect his marriage, to confront the painful truths head-on. Yet a part of me felt like a stranger, driven to the edge of trust, peering into an abyss. Julia left for her business dinner with a breezy kiss on my cheek and a promise to not be late. I watched her drive away, the taillights of her car a pair of red eyes fading into the twilight. Once she was gone, I gave myself a few minutes, then followed. The address she'd casually left open on her laptop was for a high-end restaurant downtown, a place we had once celebrated our anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me. I parked across the street from the restaurant, my car shrouded in the anonymity of dusk. The evening was cool, and people around me were wrapped in their coats, their faces half hidden beneath scarves and hats, their own lives a mystery. I felt a kinship with these strangers, each perhaps carrying their own burdens of heartache and suspicion. From my vantage point, I could see the entrance to the restaurant. Patrons came and went, couples, mostly some families. The warmth of the restaurant interior spilled out each time the door opened, a brief glimpse into a world that seemed increasingly foreign to me. Then I saw her. Julia arrived, not with a group, but alone. My heart sank deeper with each step she took towards the door. She paused before entering, looking around as if she felt the weight of my gaze. I ducked instinctively, my breath catching. When I dared to look again, she was gone, swallowed by the warmth of the restaurant. Minutes turned to hours as I waited, watching the door like a hawk, a cold pit forming in my stomach. Couples and groups came and went, laughing, untouched by the chill of the night or the chill in my heart. Then he appeared, the man from the photos, unmistakable in his elegance, his confidence. He paused at the entrance, scanning the street much like Julia had. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, my knuckles white with the effort to maintain control. When Julia emerged to greet him, my worst fears were confirmed. Their greeting was not that of colleagues, but of lovers. The ease of their interaction, the way she touched his arm, leaning into him with familiarity and affection, it was all the evidence I needed. I should have confronted them then, demanded answers, shattered the facade as they had shattered my trust. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, not by the cold, but by the piercing realization of betrayal. They eventually disappeared inside, leaving me to grapple with the shards of my broken illusions. Sitting alone in the darkness of my car, the sounds of the city a distant murmur, I understood that this was the beginning of the end. Whatever came next, whatever confrontations or heartbreaks awaited, tonight marked the irrevocable shattering of our marriage. I would confront Julia, but not tonight. Tonight, I mourned the loss of what I had believed to be true love, the kind that was supposed to last a lifetime. As the late hours of the night crept towards morning, I started the car and drove home. The silence in my heart, a stark echo of the silence in our bed where Julia would no longer lay. The drive home was haunted by silence and the echo of my own thoughts. Streets I had traveled 1,000 times now seemed cloaked in a darkness that reflected my turmoil. When I arrived home, the house was quiet, its shadows deeper and more foreboding than ever before. I sat in the living room in darkness, the weight of what I'd witnessed pressing down on me. The images of Julia and that man, laughing and touching, were seared into my mind, undeniable in their intimacy. I tried to make sense of it all, to prepare myself for the confrontation that I knew had to come. Yet, when I heard Julia's car pull into the driveway, my heart raced with a mix of dread and an urgent need for explanations. Julia entered the house quietly, perhaps thinking I was asleep. When she saw me sitting in the dark, her body stiffened with surprise. "Michael," her voice was tentative, a clear note of confusion in it. "What are you doing sitting in the dark? Is everything okay?" I stood up, my movements stiff, the emotions difficult to control. "No, everything is not okay. We need to talk, Julia." She flicked on the light, her face revealing her concern. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath, the words painful but necessary. "I saw you tonight with him." Julia's expression shifted into one of shock, then confusion. "With who, Michael? What are you talking about?" "The man from the restaurant. I saw how close you two were. It's pretty clear what's going on." Julia's face hardened with disbelief. "You were spying on me?" "Michael, I was at a dinner with clients. Yes, there was a man there. He's a new client. But whatever you think you saw, you're wrong." Her denial was adamant, her tone laced with a mix of anger and hurt. "I can't believe you would think that of me, that you'd go to such lengths before even asking me about it." I felt a flicker of doubt, but the images I had witnessed were vivid and telling. "Julia, it was clear from what I saw. How can you explain that?" "I don't need to explain my innocence against baseless accusations, Michael. If you trusted me, truly trusted me, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Julia's voice was icy, her posture rigid. The room grew colder with her words. I was at a loss. Her denial seemed sincere, but what I had seen felt indisputable. I need to understand," I stammered, my resolve shaking. "There's nothing to understand," Julia replied sharply. "I'm going to bed. We can talk more when you're ready to discuss this like adults." With that, she turned and left the room, leaving me alone with my doubts and the aching silence. That night was long and sleepless. I replayed the evening over and over, Julia's denial wrestling with the evidence of my own eyes. The trust that had once been the foundation of our relationship now felt cracked and uncertain. Was I wrong? Had my insecurities projected guilt where there was none? Or was Julia lying, protecting a secret life I was not part of? As dawn crept through the curtains, nothing was resolved. The gap between us had widened, filled with unspoken accusations and palpable distrust. I knew then that whether my suspicions were true or not, something fundamental had changed in our marriage. The path back to how we were seemed obscured, perhaps irretrievable. The next steps were unclear, but I knew they would determine the future of our relationship, for better or for worse. In the weeks that followed our tense confrontation, I chose to believe Julia. Her assurance that the man was merely a client, and her apparent openness thereafter, gradually restored a semblance of normalcy between us. We resumed our evening walks, shared meals filled with casual conversation, and slowly, the tight knot of suspicion in my chest began to loosen. Life, it seemed, was returning to its old rhythm. Julia made an effort to be more transparent. She shared details about her work, her meetings, even inviting me to a couple of events. Her phone no longer seemed like a guarded fortress. It lay around casually, which eased my earlier concerns about secrecy. This openness helped rebuild some of the trust that had been eroded that night in the living room. However, the foundation of our relationship had been shaken, and deep down, a part of me remained on alert, sensitive to any hint of deception. It was a fragment of doubt that I couldn't completely dismiss, a shadow that followed quietly behind the renewed laughter and shared moments. One chilly evening, as I was coming back from a late meeting, the shadow that lurked in my doubts stepped starkly into the light. I decided to surprise Julia by meeting her downtown, where she had mentioned she would be having dinner with a client. As I approached the familiar street, lined with its bustling restaurants and glowing shop windows, a peculiar sense of unease took hold. Turning the corner, my eyes were drawn to a car parked slightly away from the street lamps, its interior dimly lit. As I moved closer, the figures inside became clear. It was Julia, unmistakable even in the low light, but she was not alone. The man from before, the so-called client, was with her. Their actions unmistakable. They were locked in an intimate embrace, far removed from any pretense of a professional relationship. The sight struck me like a physical blow, a confirmation of the fears I had tried so hard to quiet. I felt rooted to the spot, the cold seeping through my clothes, mirroring the chill that spread through my veins. After a moment suspended in shock, I forced my legs to move, my approach to the car steady and resolute. Tapping sharply on the window shattered the seclusion of their private world. Julia's eyes met mine, wide with shock and horror. The man scrambled to disentangle himself, his expression a mix of embarrassment and fear. I gestured for Julia to get out of the car. My voice, when I finally found it, was calm but cold with barely suppressed anger. "We need to talk," I said as Julia stepped out, her face pale, her eyes not leaving mine. "I can explain," she started, her voice trembling. "I think you've done enough of that," I interrupted, the hurt clear in my voice despite my controlled demeanor. "Let's go home. We'll discuss this there." The drive home was suffocating, filled with a heavy silence that neither of us dared break. Once home, the words finally came, each one laden with the weight of our crumbling relationship. "I thought we were past this, Julia. I trusted you," I said, the sense of betrayal deepening with each word. "I'm sorry, Michael. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake," Julia replied, her voice breaking. "A mistake that seems to keep happening," I observed, the bitterness evident in my tone. Once we were home, Julia pleaded, her voice filled with urgency and regret. "Michael, please, can we just talk about this? It was a mistake, a one-time thing. It won't happen again." I stood by the kitchen counter, my hands bracing the edge, struggling to process the whirlwind of betrayal and pain. "A one-time thing? Julia, I can't just brush this aside. This isn't just about tonight. It's about trust, and once that's broken—" She cut me off, desperation lacing her tone. I know I've messed up. But think about everything we have together. Our home, our life. You can't throw it all away over one mistake." "One mistake?" The words echoed bitterly. "It's not just one mistake, Julia. It's every lie that covered it up. It's every time you looked me in the eyes and told me there was nothing to worry about." The pain was palpable, a physical ache that accompanied the sense of betrayal. Julia's face crumpled, tears welling up, but then her expression shifted, hardened by what seemed like a sudden resolve. "What about our marriage vows? For better, for worse, Michael? Or does that only apply when things are easy?" Her words stung, a mix of truth and manipulation that left me reeling. "It's about respect, Julia. How can we go back to how things were knowing what I know now?" She took a step closer, her voice lowering to a whisper that carried an unspoken threat. "And what if I'm not ready to let it go? What if I fight this, Michael? Do you really want to drag us both through that mud?" Her implication was clear, a messy, public divorce that could tarnish both our reputations and drain us emotionally and financially. Her stance was defensive, almost aggressive, a far cry from the woman I thought I knew. I felt cornered, trapped by the situation and her words. The realization that this could get uglier hardened my resolve. If that's what it takes to be free of lies, then yes, I'm prepared to go through it, I responded firmly. Julia looked taken aback, perhaps not expecting my pushback. You'd ruin us both? Over what pride? Not pride, Julia. Integrity. Something I need to live with myself. My voice was calm, but inside, everything felt like chaos. We stood in silence, the air thick with unsaid words and stifled emotions. Julia finally spoke, her voice softer. I don't want a divorce, Michael. I love you. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Counseling, therapy, anything. The offer was tempting, a part of me longing for a way to mend the irreparable. But the images of her with another man, the lies too easily told, they were barriers too substantial to dismiss. I need some time, Julia. Time to think about what I want, what I can forgive. Julia nodded, wiping away tears, a mix of sorrow and something darker in her eyes. Okay, take your time. But remember, Michael, we're in this together. One way or another. As I walked away, her words lingered in the air, a veiled threat or a reminder of our entwined lives. I couldn't tell. The next steps were uncertain, but one thing was clear. The path forward would be fraught with challenges, both emotional and possibly legal. The scandal of a crumbling marriage was just beginning to unfold. In the days following our strained conversation, a tense ceasefire held at home. We moved around each other with a politeness that was as thin as ice, fragile and cold. I spent my days lost in thought, pondering the right course of action, while Julia seemed unusually busy, often locked away in hush phone calls or quick trips out of the house. The first hint that something was amiss came subtly. I noticed changes in the demeanor of people around me. Colleagues at work who were usually friendly began to give me cautious, measured looks. My morning greetings were met with curt nods instead of smiles. It was confusing at first, until I overheard a conversation by the coffee machine. I heard he was pretty controlling. Poor Julia, one of my colleagues whispered, not knowing I was within earshot. Stunned, I returned to my desk, my mind racing. The isolation at work soon extended into other areas of my life. Old friends started to cancel our usual meetups, each with flimsy excuses that felt like veiled rejections. It didn't take long for the full picture to emerge. My sister, Anna, was the one who finally confronted me. Michael, what's going on with you and Julia? People are saying things, terrible things. What things? I asked, though a sinking feeling had already taken hold. That you've been, well, abusive. That you've been controlling and harsh with Julia. She's apparently been confiding in some friends, and word has gotten around. Anna said cautiously, her expression a mix of concern and disbelief. The accusation hit like a slap. Abuse? Controlling? These were manipulations of the truth so extreme, so far from reality that they left me momentarily speechless. Anna, that's not true. None of it is. Julia and I are having problems, yes, but I've never been abusive. How could she say these things? Anna sighed, sitting down next to me. I didn't want to believe it, Michael. But she sounded so convinced, so victimized. She's been telling people that she's afraid of what you might do if she tries to leave you. The realization that Julia was not only spreading lies, but painting herself as a victim in a narrative she crafted, was a betrayal of a different kind. It wasn't just our marriage that was crumbling. It was my entire life, being reshaped by falsehoods. I felt a surge of anger, followed by a deep, weary sadness. I don't know why she's doing this, Anna, but I'm telling you, it's not true. I need to clear this up. Deciding to take action, I reached out to a few close friends, trying to set the record straight. The conversations were difficult, a mix of awkward explanations and reassurances. Some were sympathetic, offering support and believing my side of the story. Others seemed skeptical, their trust eroded by the rumors they had heard. The situation at home became even more strained. Julia's actions were now openly hostile, her campaign against me not just a private war, but a public spectacle. Our interactions were limited and formal, and the house felt more like a battleground than a home. One evening, as I was mulling over my options, a call from an old friend, Derek, came as a lifeline. Mike, I heard what's being said about you. I know you better than that. What can I do to help? Grateful for an ally, I explained everything to Derek. His support was unwavering. Let's meet up with the guys, get everyone together, and talk this through. You need to face this head on, and you'll need all the support you can get. Arrangements were made, and soon, a meeting was set. It was time to confront the storm of rumors head on, to try and salvage what was left of my reputation, and to confront the web of lies that Julia had woven. The path ahead was fraught with difficulty, but with support, I hoped to navigate through the turmoil and find some semblance of peace and truth. The meeting with my close friends, organized by Derek, served as a vital turning point. Gathered around in Derek's living room, the air thick with tension and unspoken questions, I laid out everything. My suspicions, the confrontation, Julia's denials, and finally, the shocking spread of malicious rumors. The support from my friends, some of whom had initially believed the rumors, was reinforcing. They offered not just their belief in my innocence, but also their assistance in any way I needed. Bolstered by this wave of support, I made a decision that felt both inevitable and heartbreakingly final. I would file for divorce. With my decision made, I contacted a lawyer the very next morning, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Eleanor who came highly recommended for cases like mine. We'll need to move quickly, given the circumstances, Eleanor advised during our initial meeting. If your wife is spreading false allegations, it's essential to establish your narrative legally before things escalate further. I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and sorrow at the formal dismantling of my marriage. The process was clinical, and Eleanor's efficiency was a comfort in the chaos that my personal life had become. However, just as I began to take steps to regain control of my life, Julia launched a countermove that I hadn't anticipated. She had been unusually quiet since the rumors came to light, a silence that I now realized was the calm before a new storm. 2 days after I met with my lawyer, Julia requested to meet at a neutral location. We sat across from each other in a quiet corner of a local cafe, the air between us charged with unspoken words. "Michael, I know you've started talking to a lawyer about divorce," Julia began, her voice steady but her hands nervously twisting a napkin. "But I have something important to tell you, something that might change things." I met her gaze, wary of another manipulation, but curious about what she felt could possibly alter the course we were on. "What is it, Julia?" "I'm pregnant, Michael," she said softly, her eyes searching mine for a reaction. The news hit me like a physical blow. Pregnant? The implications were enormous and instantly complicated everything. My mind raced through the past weeks, the timelines, the possibilities. Could it be true? Or was this a desperate ploy to delay the divorce, to anchor me to her with a new set of responsibilities? "How? Are you sure?" I managed to ask, struggling to keep my voice even. "Yes, I just found out. I thought it was stress causing my symptoms at first, but I took a test and then another. Michael, I know things have been terrible between us, but this is our child. I hope this might make us rethink everything for the sake of our family." The word family echoed in my mind, tainted now by doubts and suspicions. The timing was too perfect, too convenient. Yet, the potential reality of a child, my child being brought into the middle of this turmoil, gave me pause. The stakes were higher, the decisions now wrapped in layers of consequence that reached far beyond our failing marriage. "I need to think about this, Julia. I need proof," I said finally, the weight of the situation settling heavily on my shoulders. "Of course. We can go to the doctor together," she replied, her voice hopeful. As I left the cafe, the world seemed to shift around me, the familiar streets a backdrop to a life that was now unrecognizable. I called Eleanor to update her, her response pragmatic and cautious. "This changes the legal landscape if it's true. We'll need to verify the pregnancy independently," she advised. The days that followed were a haze of legal consultations and deep personal reflection. The possibility of a child, my child, being involved made me question the path of divorce, even as I doubted Julia's motives. Was there a chance for reconciliation, or was it merely a delay of the inevitable? Each step forward was now weighted with far greater implications, the future a tapestry of legal, moral, and personal decisions that I was still unraveling. The following weeks were a surreal blend of tension and mandatory civility. The possibility of a child on the way fundamentally altered the landscape of our discussions. We scheduled an appointment with Julia's doctor to confirm the pregnancy, a visit that felt more like a business negotiation than a personal moment. Sitting in the doctor's office, I watched the emotions play across Julia's face. Nervousness, anticipation, perhaps a hint of manipulation. When the doctor confirmed her pregnancy, a part of me felt an unexpected jolt of reality hit. This was no longer just about us. There was a potential child to consider in our decisions now. "Congratulations," the doctor said, seemingly oblivious to the cold undercurrents between us. Julia looked at me, her eyes searching for a reaction. "Michael, can we talk? Maybe try to work things out, for the baby's sake?" The drive home was filled with a heavy silence. I was torn, caught between my feelings of betrayal and the undeniable responsibility I now faced. At home, we sat down to discuss our options, but the conversation quickly spiraled into familiar territory. "Michael, think about what this means. We could be a family," Julia implored, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Pulling away, I felt a surge of frustration. "Julia, even if we're going to be parents, I can't just forget everything. How can we build a family on lies and deceit?" Her face fell, and she withdrew her hand. "I know I've made mistakes, but this could be a new start for us." I sighed, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "I need some time to think about all of this. Being parents is separate from us being together. We need to consider if trying to stay together is really best for this child." As the days passed, the situation became more complex. Julia's narrative to our friends and family began to shift subtly. She portrayed herself as the wronged party trying to save our marriage for the sake of our unborn child, a spin that caused many to view me as the one being unreasonable. Phone calls and visits from concerned relatives became frequent, each one a reminder of how public our private torments had become. Feeling cornered and manipulated, I met with Eleanor to discuss the implications of the pregnancy on the divorce proceedings. "Legally, this complicates your situation. If you decide to go through with the divorce, you'll need to prepare for a custody battle and potential child support," she explained, her tone clinical yet sympathetic. The reality of legal battles and custody disputes loomed large, painting a stark picture of the future. Despite the complications, my resolve to not return to a marriage built on deception remained firm. "I want to proceed with the divorce," I told Eleanor. "But I also want to be part of my child's life, no matter what." As we prepared the necessary documents, I reached out to a few friends who had been through similar situations. Their advice was a mix of caution and encouragement, each story a tapestry of personal pain and eventual adaptation. The decision to divorce, despite the pregnancy, was not received well. Julia was furious when I informed her, accusing me of abandoning her and the baby. "You're choosing to tear our family apart before it even starts," she cried. "It's not about tearing anything apart, Julia. It's about setting it right. I can be a father without being your husband," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. As I left that night to stay at a friend's place, the weight of the upcoming challenges felt immense. But amidst the fear and uncertainty, there was a flicker of hope, a chance to start anew, not just for myself but for my child. The road ahead was fraught with legal and emotional battles, but I was determined to walk it with integrity and hope. In the weeks that followed my decision to proceed with the divorce despite Julia's pregnancy, the situation grew increasingly contentious. Julia's initial shock turned into a hardened resolve to fight the divorce every step of the way. The narrative she painted to our friends and family became one of a callous husband abandoning his pregnant wife, a portrayal that isolated me further within our social circles. My lawyer, Eleanor, prepared me for the difficult path ahead. "These cases can get messy, especially with a child involved. You need to be prepared for emotional and possibly public confrontations," she cautioned during one of our strategy meetings. We filed the divorce papers, citing irreconcilable differences, careful to navigate the delicate situation without escalating tensions unnecessarily. However, Julia's reaction to the filing was explosive. She accused me of cruelty and emotional abandonment, using her pregnancy as a shield against the dissolution of our marriage. Michael, how could you do this to me, to your unborn child? Julia confronted me one evening after she received the divorce papers, her voice filled with a mix of anger and distress. I'm not abandoning our child, Julia. I will support our child, but our marriage is beyond repair. You know the reasons why. I replied, trying to maintain a level of calm despite the swirling emotions. The legal proceedings slowly ground forward, with Julia contesting every term and condition. Custody and support arrangements became battlegrounds. I was committed to being a part of my child's life, and Eleanor recommended filing for joint custody, which only intensified Julia's antagonism. During this time, my relationship with our mutual friends and some family members deteriorated further. Julia's narrative had taken root, and despite my efforts to explain my side, the community's sympathy lay heavily with her. I found solace in support groups for divorcing parents and a few close friends who stood by me, understanding the complexities of the situation. As the pregnancy progressed, so did our divorce proceedings. We attended mandatory mediation sessions, which were fraught with tension. Julia often brought up the pregnancy, using it as an emotional lever to gain favorable terms. Despite the manipulative tactics, I focused on the bigger picture, establishing a stable future for my child. I want to ensure that our child knows I fought to be in their life, not that I walked away, I expressed to Eleanor after a particularly grueling mediation session. Keeping that focus is important, Michael. Let's aim for a parenting plan that reflects your commitment, Eleanor replied, outlining strategies to strengthen my case for joint custody. The months rolled by, each one a mix of legal challenges and personal reckonings. As Julia's due date approached, the reality of becoming a father under these circumstances weighed heavily on me. I prepared a nursery at my new place, choosing each item with care, hoping that despite the ongoing conflict, I could provide a peaceful and welcoming environment for my child. One late afternoon, as I was setting up a crib, I received a call from Julia's lawyer. She had gone into labor and was at the hospital. The moment was upon us sooner than I had anticipated. Despite everything, the news filled me with a profound sense of responsibility and urgency. Driving to the hospital, I felt a complex mix of excitement and apprehension. The impending meeting at the hospital was not just about witnessing the birth of my child, but also possibly confronting Julia in a vulnerable state. I steeled myself, ready to meet my child for the first time, determined to start a relationship that, I hoped, would be untainted by the turmoil surrounding our divorce. Arriving at the hospital, I navigated the corridors, my heart pounding with anticipation and nerves. The future of my relationship with my child was about to begin, and despite the chaos of the past months, I was ready to embrace whatever came with openness and dedication. The battle for my marriage might have been lost, but the fight for my child's future was just beginning. The atmosphere in the hospital room was charged with a potent mix of emotions as I entered. Julia, looking exhausted yet relieved, cradled a tiny newborn in her arms. The sight was profoundly moving, yet the layers of our fraught interactions hung heavily between us. I began, my voice trailing off, unsure of how to navigate this delicate moment. Julia nodded, and I approached tentatively, peering down at the infant, a beautiful, innocent face oblivious to the complexities waiting outside the safety of its mother's arms. The nurse, sensing the tension, offered me a small smile, an acknowledgement of the situation's difficulty. Holding my child for the first time was an indescribable feeling, filled with awe and overshadowed by a nagging concern that had been gnawing at me since Julia's pregnancy announcement. The doubts about the child's paternity, fueled by the timing and circumstances of our deteriorating relationship, had led me to request a paternity test discreetly. The results, I knew, would be ready any day now. Julia, I've been thinking a lot about how we move forward from here. I started, carefully placing the baby back in her arms. Regardless of everything, I want to be fair and do right by our child. Julia's eyes met mine, a flicker of uncertainty passing through them. I know. I want that too. The next few days were a blur of legal consultations and visits to the hospital. When the call finally came from the lab with the DNA results, my heart sank. I was alone in my apartment, the walls lined with pictures of happier times, a stark contrast to the current turmoil. "Mr. Foster, we have the results of the paternity test." The voice on the line was clinical, detached. "Please go ahead," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "The test results indicate that you are not the biological father of the child." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Not the father? The room seemed to spin, and I grasped the back of a chair for support. A mix of emotions surged through me: relief, anger, profound sadness. It was definitive. Julia's betrayal ran deeper than I had imagined. With the paternity results in hand, I met with Eleanor to discuss the implications. "This changes your legal situation significantly," she noted, reviewing the documents. "It will affect your divorce proceedings and any obligations towards the child." Armed with the truth, I faced Julia again, this time in her lawyer's office for a scheduled meeting. Her face, when I laid the paternity results on the table, went pale. She started, but the words seemed to fail her. "How could you, Julia?" My voice was low, controlled, each word a testament to the betrayal I felt. "Why would you lie about something so fundamental?" Julia was silent for a long moment, her eyes not meeting mine. Finally, she whispered, "I thought it would fix things between us." By deceiving me, I shook my head, a mixture of disbelief and clarity settling in. "You were ready to let me believe I was the father, knowing full well I wasn't." The conversation that followed was difficult, but necessary. It became clear that our paths were irreversibly divergent. With the truth revealed, the process of untangling our lives could proceed with a new clarity. I informed Julia and her lawyer that I would move forward with the divorce and would not seek any parental rights, as I had no biological tie to the child. As I left the office that day, the weight of the past months seemed to lift slightly. The path ahead was still fraught with challenges, but the air was clearer now. The deception was behind me, and ahead lay the task of rebuilding my life, free from the shadows of doubt and betrayal that had clouded my recent existence. The finalization of the divorce came as a somber relief. It was a conclusion to months of emotional turmoil and legal battles. The proceedings ended quietly, a stark contrast to the chaotic disputes that had led us here. Julia and I sat in stark silence as the judge pronounced our marriage dissolved. As I walked out of the courthouse, the weight of my wedding band absent from my finger, I felt an odd mix of sadness and liberation. In the wake of the divorce, the truth about Julia's deceit gradually came to light. Friends and family members, some of whom had distanced themselves during the height of the rumors, began to reach out. The revelation that Julia had lied about the paternity of the child and her attempts to manipulate the narrative against me had shifted the community's perspective dramatically. One by one, old friends apologized for their earlier mistrust, and slowly, my social circles began to mend. The support was heartening, a crucial balm for the wounds left by the ordeal. Professionally, my career, which had momentarily suffered a setback due to the stress and distractions, began to flourish once more. With my personal life no longer occupying my every thought, I could devote myself fully to my work. New projects and opportunities emerged, and I embraced them with a renewed vigor, grateful for the chance to rebuild my reputation and focus on the future. Moreover, the support groups I had joined during the divorce became a continued source of strength and perspective. I realized the power of community and understanding in healing from personal trauma. Motivated by my experiences, I began volunteering with a local organization that provided counseling and support for individuals going through similar situations. As my life stabilized, I found new joy in pursuits I had neglected: photography, hiking, and traveling. Each photograph I took, every trail I explored, felt like a step away from the past and towards something new and hopeful. Eventually, I even began dating again. It was initially daunting, the prospect of trusting someone new. However, I found that the trials I had endured had taught me not only about the resilience of the human spirit, but also about the importance of honesty and communication in relationships. These lessons guided me in forming connections that were rooted in transparency and mutual respect. One crisp autumn evening, as I stood on a hill overlooking the city, camera in hand, waiting for the perfect sunset shot, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The pain had been real, and the betrayal deep, but they had not defined me. Instead, they had sculpted me into someone stronger, someone who understood his worth and the value of true connections. The sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a spectacular display of nature's artistry. As the light faded, I felt a profound sense of peace. Life had indeed moved on, and I had moved with it, not unscarred but undeterred, ready to face whatever new adventures lay ahead. The chapter of my life that included Julia was closed, a part of my history that would always influence who I was. But as I packed away my camera and headed back down the trail, the future seemed bright and full of possibilities. Life after divorce was not just a path to recovery, but a path to discovery, of self, of community, and of the unexplored joys that lay just over the next horizon.